A mother dog chased her dragged puppy in panic until a Marine stepped in and saved them both. The desert road looked empty until it wasn't. Jake Mercer had driven that stretch of Cochise County more times than he could count, but that afternoon the sky felt heavier, the air sharper. He had rolled the windows down to let the hot wind wash over him, hoping the silence of the open land would settle the noise still living in his head since coming home from the Marines. Then something burst out of the haze. A dog. No, two. A mother dog shot across the road like a streak of sand and fear, her coat a dusty mix of tan and grey. She wasn't running. She was chasing. And Jake didn't understand what he was seeing until his gut clenched tight. Behind her, a small puppy was being dragged across the asphalt, tied by a frayed rope caught under the rear bumper of an old rattling cargo truck. The truck gained speed. The puppy yelped, a sound so raw it cut straight through the engine's hum. The mother dog lunged after him, barking so frantically it didn't sound like barking at all, but panic in its purest form. Her paws skidded across gravel. She stumbled, stood up again, and ran harder. Jake slammed his brakes. The tires screamed, dust exploded around the truck, and for a moment he sat frozen, unable to trust what he'd just witnessed. Then instinct took over. Movement replaced thought. He threw the door open and sprinted into the storm of dirt kicked up by the fleeing truck. The world narrowed, the truck's fading tail lights, the smear of dust, the puppy's limp body scraping the road, the mother dog's hoarse cries. Everything else disappeared. Jake's boots hit the ground harder, faster. He could feel the heat of the asphalt rising through the soles, hear his breath tearing out in short bursts. Something old woke up inside him, the part that used to run toward gunfire, toward danger, toward whatever no one else had the strength to face. The truck jerked when it hit a pothole, and the puppy bounced violently across the ground. Jake pushed harder. The mother dog veered suddenly, as if she'd heard something Jake hadn't. She darted in front of him, cutting across his path, barking at him, not warning him away, but calling him in. Begging. Pleading. Her eyes locked on his as if she knew he was the only chance left. It made no sense for her to trust him, but she did, and he followed. He reached the dragging rope just as the truck swerved onto a curve. Without thinking, Jake threw himself forward. His hand caught the rope. The force nearly yanked him off his feet. Gravel tore into his knees. Pain shot up his arm, but he held on. The truck kept going. Jake planted his boots, clenched the rope, and wrenched it sideways with everything he had. The frayed knot jerked. The rope snapped free. The puppy tumbled across the road in a cloud of blood and dust. The truck didn't stop. It didn't even slow down. Jake scrambled to the small, trembling body. The puppy was limp, breath shallow, one leg twisted unnaturally. Blood seeped through his fur. But his eyes blinked open long enough to look right at Jake, as if checking who had finally stopped the world from dragging him. Then the mother dog slid beside them, her body shaking uncontrollably, pressing her head to the puppy's side, then nudging Jake's arm once gently, as if asking, "Is he alive? Tell me he's still here." Jake placed a hand on the pup's chest. A faint heartbeat tapped beneath his fingers. Faint, but present. He exhaled for the first time since slamming the brakes. A low rumble echoed across the desert. Jake looked up. The truck had stopped far ahead. Its brake lights glowed red through the dust. The silhouette of a man climbed out. He stared back at them from the distance, motionless, watchful. The mother dog tensed, stepping in front of Jake and the puppy, her body low, her teeth barely showing. She knew that man. Jake could see it in the way her fur bristled, in the growl vibrating through her chest. Jake whispered, almost to himself, "You were running from him." A gust of wind carried sand across the road like smoke. The man lifted something metallic in his hand. Jake couldn't see what it was, but the mother dog's growl deepened, turning into a warning born from pure instinct. Then, without a word, the man climbed back into his truck. The engine roared. The tires spun, spraying dust, and the truck sped away into the desert as if it had somewhere urgent to hide. Jake stayed frozen for a moment, watching the dust trail grow smaller and smaller. His pulse pounded in his ears. His mind raced with questions he didn't yet have the pieces to answer. But the puppy whimpered softly, pulling him back to the present. Jake lifted the small dog carefully into his arms. The mother dog pressed against his leg, shaking, but she didn't run. She didn't flee into the desert like most strays would. She stayed. Jake looked down at her, meeting her desperate, pleading eyes. "All right," he murmured, voice steadying. "We're going to get him help. I promise." She followed him without hesitation. And for the first time since he'd left the Marines, Jake felt the world shift. Not away from him, but toward him, like fate had just drawn a line in the sand. And he had stepped over it. Jake held the puppy against his chest, feeling every shaky breath the little thing fought to take. The blood soaking through his shirt was warm, sticky, and far too much for a creature that small. The desert wind stung his face, kicking dust against his boots, but all he saw was the puppy's limp body and the mother dog pacing around him in tight, frantic circles. She wasn't sure if he was friend or threat. Her ribs heaved, her fur bristled. She hovered close enough to strike if he made one wrong move. But she never took her eyes off the puppy. That was her anchor, her reason for not attacking, her reason for staying. Jake crouched, slowly, letting her see what he was doing. His voice dropped into that quiet place Marines used in the worst moments, steady but gentle. "I'm just trying to help him. That's it. Nothing else." The mother dog froze. Her ears twitched. Her tail stayed low, uncertain. Jake eased the puppy closer to her nose so she could smell him, confirm he was still alive. She sniffed fast, desperate, nudging her pup with trembling whiskers. Then something shifted. She stepped closer to Jake, but not to hurt him. She pressed her forehead to his knee, just for a second. It wasn't trust, not yet. It was something rawer, a plea, a mother begging anyone, even a stranger, to save her child. Jake swallowed hard. He'd seen men cling to him the same way on the battlefield, eyes begging for what he couldn't always give. But he could do something today. The puppy whimpered, a soft, broken sound that vibrated through Jake's ribs. He adjusted his grip on the small body and stood. "All right, okay. We're going now." The mother dog stayed glued to his side, as if afraid he'd vanish into thin air with her pup. Every step she matched his, head low, breath hot with fear. She kept bumping the back of his leg whenever he moved too fast, forcing him to slow down. It almost felt like she was herding him toward safety. Jake opened the truck door carefully, placing the puppy onto a folded jacket to keep him steady. The mother dog immediately attempted to jump in, but her paws slipped on the metal. She barked once, sharp and panicked. Jake lifted her. She didn't fight him this time. Her body, tense as a drawn bow, slowly loosened when she landed beside the puppy and curled herself around him as if her warmth alone could keep him alive. Jake slid into the driver's seat, breath still uneven. The truck hummed beneath him. He glanced back at them. The mother dog's eyes met his, full of mistrust and hope braided together in a way only a desperate heart could shape. He turned the key. They sped toward town. But a mile out, a sudden jolt struck the truck. The entire frame shuddered. Jake's hands tightened on the wheel. Another thump. More violent. He braked hard and jumped out to check the rear tire. What he found made his stomach twist. A strip of metal had been lodged deep in the rubber. Not an accident. A caltrop. Handmade. Sharp enough to puncture any tire that dared drive through the wrong patch of desert. Someone had planned for vehicles to stop on that road. Someone had laid traps. Jake scanned the horizon. Nothing but heat waves and empty space. But the man from earlier lingered in his mind. The way he had watched, the way he had left. Too calm, too practiced, too familiar with running. Jake's throat tightened. This wasn't random. He forced himself to breathe. There was no time to dig deeper. The puppy needed help now. He replaced the tire with frantic, practiced hands. The kind of speed you learn from years of needing to move before danger finds you. Back in the truck, the mother dog growled low at the desert, as if she too sensed a threat still circling out of sight. Jake drove faster. The small veterinary clinic sat at the edge of town, a squat building with a flickering sign that read, Hayes Animal Care. The parking lot was empty except for an old SUV and a tricycle left on its side. Jake pulled up, jumped out, and scooped the puppy back into his arms. The mother dog followed so close she nearly tripped him. Inside, the cool air hit him like a wave. The smell of antiseptic and dog shampoos filled the room. A woman in a lab coat looked up from behind the counter. Jake, what in the world? Marla, I need help, now. One look at the blood pooling in Jake's arms, and Marla Hayes didn't ask another question. She rushed forward, guiding them into the surgical room. The mother dog tried to push past her. Jake had to hold her back gently. Marla examined the puppy quickly, her movements precise. This leg is split open, deep. He's lost a lot of blood, but he's fighting. He must be maybe 8 weeks old. She paused, frowning at the rope burns around the puppy's chest. This didn't happen by accident. Jake's jaw flexed. I know. Marla reached for a tray of tools, snapping on gloves. I'll do everything I can, but it's going to take time. And she. Marla nodded toward the mother dog. Might not understand why I'm taking her baby away. The mother dog barked at the metal instruments. Her entire body shook, torn between terror and fury. Jake knelt beside her. I'm not leaving him. You're not losing him again, I swear. He didn't know why he said it. He'd made promises on the battlefield he couldn't keep. But this one felt different. It felt like something inside him was finally being asked to stand up again. The mother dog leaned her weight against him. Not much, but enough. Enough to say she heard him. Enough to say she was holding him to his word. Marla carried the puppy into the surgery room. The door swung shut behind her with a heavy click. The clinic fell quiet. Jake sat on the floor beside the mother dog, the two of them alone under the humming fluorescent lights. She rested her head on his boot and closed her eyes, exhausted from fear. Jake stared at the closed door. And for the first time since coming home from war, he wasn't thinking about what he'd lost. He was thinking about what he had to protect now. The surgical room door opened with a soft click, and Marla stepped out, peeling off her gloves. Her face carried that tight mix of exhaustion and focus that Jake had seen before in field medics. She nodded once. He's stable for now. I stitched the leg, cleaned the wounds, stopped the bleeding, but he needs rest and careful monitoring. The mother dog, Riley as Jake had started calling her in his mind, pushed past him and pressed her nose to Marla's sleeve, searching for any sign of her pup. Marla crouched slowly. He's alive, and he's tough. That little guy has more fight in him than most. Riley's tail twitched, but her eyes stayed worried, fixed on the door behind Marla. Jake exhaled, tension draining from his shoulders. Marla stood again and motioned him closer. There's something you need to see. She led him to the metal table where she'd laid out the items she'd removed from the puppy. A frayed rope, bits of gravel, dried blood, and something odd. A smudge of greenish-blue ink staining the fur along Scout's ribcage. Jake frowned. What is that? Marla grabbed a magnifying lamp, lowering it over the stain. It's not paint or dye. It's a marker tag. Happens in illegal dog snatching rings. They brand animals with quick-dry ink for tracking and trade codes. Each color means something different. Jake stiffened. You're saying someone marked him like merchandise? Yes. And the rope burns, the dragging marks on his chest, the direction the skin tore all match one thing. Someone tied him under a vehicle, probably to move multiple animals fast without being seen. Riley let out a sharp bark that echoed through the clinic. She wasn't just reacting to the tone in the room. She had heard something else. A low rumble outside. A truck engine. Jake's heart hammered. Riley's ears shot up, her body going rigid. She charged toward the window, snarling through her teeth at the parking lot. Marla froze. Jake, that sound. Does she recognize it? Jake could barely hear her. The engine's growl tunneled into his skull. It wasn't just a truck. It was the same pitch and rattle from the road. He felt it like a phantom pressure behind his ribs, the same pulse that used to slam into him when mortar shells echoed through valleys overseas. His vision sharpened, his breath shortened. Riley lunged at the window again, nearly knocking over a metal tray. Her bark wasn't fearful. It was enraged. It was the sound of a mother dog who remembered the shape, smell, and sound of the machine that had tied her puppy under its steel belly. Jake forced himself to move. He stepped to the window and saw it. The same old cargo truck he had chased earlier that day, rolling past the clinic at a slow, deliberate pace. No license plate on the back. Same dented bumper. Same faded paint. Marla whispered, "Jake, is that the truck?" "It's him." Before Jake could act, the truck accelerated sharply, disappearing down the road as if the driver had only been checking whether they'd survived. Riley kept barking long after the truck was gone, claws scraping the linoleum, breath fogging the glass. The sound resonated through Jake's bones, shaking loose a memory he didn't want but couldn't stop. A Humvee explosion. A dog handler screaming a name. The ringing that followed for days. The way he'd woken up in a military hospital with someone else's blood on his face and a hole in his chest where loyalty used to be. He blinked hard, pulling himself back. Marla watched him carefully. "Jake, you all right?" "I'm fine." The lie came out dry. "But that truck, it came looking. That wasn't random." Marla nodded toward the door. "We need to call Hartman." Jake didn't hesitate. He stepped into the reception room, pulled out his phone, and dialed the Cochise County Sheriff's Office. When Deputy Cole Hartman arrived 20 minutes later, he walked in with dust still clinging to his boots and a radio squawking on his shoulder. "All right, Jake, tell me everything." Jake recounted the road, the dragging, the man in the distance, the caltrop in his tire, and the truck circling the clinic. Hartman listened carefully, expression tightening with each detail. Marla joined them. "Cole, that puppy's injuries weren't caused by a freak accident. Someone tied him under that truck. Someone marked him. That's organized cruelty." Hartman rubbed the back of his neck. "We've had reports of missing pets the last few months. Thought it was coyotes or strays. Maybe we were wrong." Riley growled again, as if confirming he was absolutely wrong. Hartman leaned down slightly, studying her. "She's protective. Smart. She sees that truck again. I bet she could track it straight to whoever's behind this." Jake nodded. "That's what I'm thinking." A tense silence filled the room. Outside, the late afternoon sun carved long shadows against the clinic wall, reaching toward the desert like warning fingers. Hartman finally spoke. "There's an abandoned construction site south of town, Old Quarry Road. Matches the type of truck you described. We'll start there tomorrow morning, but Jake—" Jake looked up. "You shouldn't get involved. You're not law enforcement anymore." Jake didn't answer, because the mother dog moved first. She stepped between the men, planted her paws, and stared at Hartman as if telling him what she already knew. They were all involved now. Jake reached down, letting his hand rest against the top of her head. Riley didn't flinch. She leaned into him with the weight of someone who had already chosen a side. Hartman watched them for a moment before shaking his head softly. Fine, but we do this smart. Marla stepped forward. And we do it fast. Whoever marked that puppy is going to come back. They'll want to finish what they started. The fluorescent lights buzzed above them. The desert breeze rattled the windows. And somewhere far beyond town, down the southern stretch of empty land, a truck engine roared to life again. The desert morning carried a brittle chill, the kind that seeped into the bones long before the sun rose high enough to burn it off. Jake stood beside Hartman's patrol truck, Riley pressed against his leg, her breath coming out in thin white clouds. Scout was still recovering at the clinic, so today it was the three of them. Hartman crouched near a patch of dirt by the roadside, studying the tire marks Jake had described. The tread was wide, rugged, and deep enough to belong to a heavy-duty cargo truck. Same pattern from the clinic sighting, Hartman said, brushing sand from the grooves with a gloved hand. If it's headed south, it's going towards the old Rattlesnake Ridge construction site. That place has been abandoned for years. Jake scanned the horizon, where rusted machinery rose from the sand like old bones. You think he's hiding there? Hartman stood. I think it's the only place out here someone could stash animals without anyone noticing. Riley suddenly stiffened. Her head lifted, nostrils flaring as she pulled in a deep breath of desert air. Then she took several steps toward the south, her body low, cautious but determined. Jake's heart quickened. She's got something. Riley didn't wait for permission. She bolted forward across the dry scrubland, nose close to the ground, following an invisible trail. Jake and Hartman scrambled back into the patrol truck and rolled forward, keeping close behind her as she wove through brush and patches of jagged rock. Riley didn't hesitate once. Her paws moved with purpose, ears flicking at every distant noise. Whatever scent she carried, it was old pain and fear, and it pulled her like a wire. The deeper they went, the more the landscape changed. Rusted metal beams lay scattered across the sand. A collapsed storage shed leaned sideways. Faded signs warning hard hat area and no entry cracked under the sun. The place felt wrong even before they stepped out of the truck. Riley growled low. Not fear. Recognition. She approached a half-toppled concrete pillar and sniffed at its base. There, buried partly under wind-blown sand, lay a torn plastic sack of dog kibble, the label faded but intact. Hartman lifted it with 2 fingers. Bought in bulk. This isn't for a few strays. Riley moved on before he finished speaking. She headed toward a patch of dirt behind a broken bulldozer, where a length of metal chain lay coiled like a dead snake. Jake knelt closer. The chain had fur caught in its links. Brown, short, the same shade as Riley's coat. The muscles in Riley's shoulders twitched as she sniffed the chain, then backed up, hackles rising. Jake swallowed. They used this on her. Hartman nodded grimly. And likely on the others. Then Riley jerked her head toward the ground beyond the bulldozer. Jake followed her gaze. A long drag line carved into the dirt stretched across the ground, parting the sand in a choppy trail. The same staggered lines he'd seen on Scout's chest. The same scraping pattern Marla described. Jake didn't breathe for a moment. This is how they moved him. He whispered, tied under the truck, dragged across this exact ground. Riley let out a soft whimper, then looked up at Jake with something raw and pleading. She wasn't just showing him evidence. She was remembering. Jake touched her neck gently. You did good, girl. You show us. We'll stop them. Hartman scanned the area, jaw tight. We're not dealing with amateurs. This is organized. Riley paced again, pausing at a rusted steel drum shoved behind a pile of concrete slabs. She gave a sharp bark and began clawing at the metal. Jake hurried over, pulling the drum free enough to peer inside. He froze. Inside were scraps of shredded blankets, torn collars, broken zip ties, and chew marks etched into the metal walls. The inside smelled faintly of old fear, a scent that clung and refused to leave even after months under the sun. Hartman swore softly. This was a holding drum. They kept dogs in here, maybe several. Jake leaned in closer and saw deep grooves scratched into the inner surface, long marks made by claws dragging down and down again, desperate to escape. He needed only a moment to imagine the panic, the heat, the suffocating tightness. Images slammed into him without warning. A dark room overseas, a trapped canine handler screaming for help, the strobe flash of a detonating grenade, a marine dog clawing at the inside of a transport crate just seconds before the blast. Jake stumbled back, gripping the drum's edge. The ground swayed beneath him. Riley pressed her head into his thigh, grounding him with her warmth. Her whine wasn't frightened, but steady, steadying him. Hartman noticed and said quietly, "Take a second." Jake inhaled sharply, forcing the vision back where it had come from. "I'm good. Keep going." But his hands trembled slightly as they continued. Riley pushed forward again, following the curve of the half-collapsed retaining wall. That was when she stopped suddenly, body going rigid, nose pointed at a dark shape wedged beneath a slab of broken concrete. Jake moved quickly, pulling aside the rubble. A thick canvas muzzle lay buried in the sand. Too big for Scout? Too big for Riley? It belonged to a large dog, possibly a German shepherd. Fresh, not bleached by the sun yet. Hartman crouched beside Jake. "This means they're active. Someone's been here recently." A distant sound echoed across the site. Jake's head snapped up. So did Riley's. The sound came again. A truck engine, faint but recognizable, rolling over gravel somewhere beyond the ridge. Jake and Hartman exchanged a look. "Is that?" Hartman whispered. "Yes," Jake answered. "Same engine." Riley barked sharply, then took off at a sprint toward the south perimeter, tail high, stance focused, moving with the precision of a trained K9. Jake didn't need an order. He ran after her. Hartman cursed under his breath and followed. Another twist hit them as they reached the edge of the construction mound. Jake expected to see a road. Instead, a narrow, hidden ravine stretched below, with deep tracks carved into the earth leading into a desert path no map showed. Someone had built themselves a secret route. Jake leaned over the ridge. Below, dust lifted in the wake of a retreating vehicle. They were minutes behind. Maybe seconds. He felt his pulse harden into something sharp. Riley stood at the edge, chest heaving, gaze locked on the disappearing trail. She didn't bark this time. She didn't have to. She had found the enemy's path. Hartman lowered his radio. "We're calling this in, but Jake, this just changed everything." Jake's voice came out rough. "Yeah, because now we know where they're going." He looked at Riley, her body steady, her eyes burning with instinct. "They took her pup. Hurt him. Hurt others. She's not stopping." He placed a hand on her head. "And neither am I." The sun hovered high above the broken scaffolds and rusted beams of the abandoned construction yard, turning the metal into sheets of blinding glare. Jake shaded his eyes as he scanned the ridge, the dust trail from the escaping truck finally gone. Riley remained at the edge, her body tense, tail stiff, ears pinned forward. Something in her posture warned him that whatever waited next would not be subtle. Hartman spoke into his radio, calling for backup that would take at least 40 minutes to reach this forgotten corner of the desert. Too long. Jake knew it. Hartman knew it. Riley felt it. A cracking sound echoed through the open lot. Not nature. Not wind. Something intentional. Jake turned sharply. A lone figure emerged from between stacks of concrete slabs, wiping grease from his hands with a rag that had long since lost its original color. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a stiff gait like someone who'd spent years working heavy machinery. His eyes were sharp under the brim of a faded cap. Raiden Crew. Jake didn't know the name yet, but the moment he saw him, his military instincts flared. The man's stance wasn't surprised or confused. It was expectant, like he'd been watching. Hartman stiffened. "Sir, Cochise County Sheriff's Office. Mind stepping into the light?" Raiden smirked but didn't move. "Didn't think anyone came out to this graveyard anymore. Guess I was wrong." Riley growled low. Deep. Dangerous. She took 2 steps forward until she stood between Jake and Raiden. Jake felt it immediately. This wasn't normal suspicion. This was memory, recognition. Riley knew him, and not in any friendly way. Raiden glanced at her with a twitch of annoyance. "That your mutt?" "She's not mine," Jake replied. "But she's not wrong about you." Raiden lifted a brow. "Careful, soldier. Some dogs bite unprovoked." "She has reasons. I can see it all over your face." For a moment, something behind Raiden's eyes thinned into cold anger. Then he shrugged it off. "If she's trembling at me, that's on her." She wasn't trembling. She was coiled, ready. Hartman stepped forward. "We're investigating reports of animal cruelty and illegal transportation. You work here." Raiden leaned against a concrete pillar. "Used to. Before the bosses pulled out and left the place to rot. Now I just check in on the equipment for scrap thieves. Nothing illegal about that." Riley snarled, the sound cutting him off. Her gaze was fixed not on Raiden, but on the shadows behind him. Jake followed her line of sight. A small metal cabin, once a site office, sat half-buried under sand drifts and broken boards. Its door was slightly ajar, and a faint metallic clink echoed from inside, too deliberate to be the wind. Hartman motioned Jake to circle wide. He approached the cabin's door with one hand hovering near his holster. "Raiden, mind letting us take a look?" Raiden didn't answer. He spat in the dirt and shifted his stance, blocking part of the path. Jake's pulse began to climb. Then Riley lunged. Not at Raiden, but toward the cabin. She darted past the men, nose twitching violently, body leaning forward as if smelling something unbearable, something familiar. "Riley, wait!" Jake sprinted after her. But the moment her paws hit the threshold, the sound triggered Jake's instincts. A metallic click, not an accident, a trigger. Jake tackled her sideways just as the rigged snare snapped upward. A thick loop of wire whipped into the air with brutal speed, slamming against the doorframe exactly where her neck had been a heartbeat earlier. Hartman shouted, "Trap!" Jake rolled with Riley, taking the brunt of the impact against the dirt. Riley yelped in shock, but quickly regained her footing, pressing herself against him. Raiden didn't flinch. He had known. Jake stood slowly, dust clinging to his clothes, pulse in his ears. He stared at Raiden, fury simmering under his skin. "That trap was set for her. You knew she'd run to that cabin." Raiden's mouth curled. "Dogs go where they're trained, or where they're stupid." Riley growled louder, teeth bared. Hartman's voice hardened. "Raiden Crew, you mind explaining why a snare trap is set in a condemned structure on property you oversee?" Raiden shrugged again. "Too casual. Got coyotes around. You know how it is out here." "No," Jake said quietly. "Coyotes don't wear rope burns. Coyotes don't get marked with ink codes, and coyotes sure as hell don't look at you the way she does." Raiden's smirk faltered. Jake stepped closer. "She remembers you. Because she's seen you before, at night, with a truck, with other dogs." For a second Raiden's jaw twitched. Then the mask returned. "You done telling stories, Marine?" Jake said nothing. Instead, he pulled open the cabin door. Riley's nose shot forward, inhaling sharply in panic and anger. Inside, the small cabin smelled of sweat, steel, and old wet fur. On the table were steel catch poles, stacks of zip ties, and a clipboard with codes and dates. Hartman flipped the clipboard open, his expression darkening. This is a transport log, not for equipment, for animals, pickups, drop-offs, quantities, payments. There were dozens of entries. Riley let out a heart-breaking whine and nudged the corner of the room with her muzzle. Jake lifted a bent crate from the ground. Inside were tufts of fur. Not Riley's, not Scout's. Several colors, several sizes. Dogs had been kept here. Many. Jake felt something inside him crack. Raiden spat again. "You don't know what you're messing with." Hartman's hand hovered over his radio. "I know enough. You're under detainment until backup arrives." He moved toward Raiden, but Raiden stepped back, lifting his hand slightly. "Sheriff's boy think he's big enough to arrest me alone?" Jake stepped between them. His voice was low, steady, and deadly calm. "He's not alone." Raiden's eyes flicked to Riley, who stood beside Jake like a soldier at attention, her body angled, ready to spring. "That dog comes at me and I'll put her down myself." Jake took one step forward. "You lay one finger on her, and I'll make sure you never touch another animal again." A beat of silence. The wind kicked dust across the abandoned yard. Then Raiden made a mistake. He lunged for something at his belt. Riley exploded forward, faster than Jake could shout. But she didn't attack Raiden. She cut across his path, forcing him to trip and stumble back, giving Jake just enough time to slam him into the concrete wall and pin his arm behind his back. Hartman rushed in, cuffing Raiden with practiced precision. Riley backed up, chest heaving, tail lifted high. Not shaking, not fearful. She had acted on instinct, on loyalty, on something deeper and older than commands. Jake steadied himself, breath hot in his throat. He looked down at Riley, and for a fleeting moment the world narrowed to the pair of them. She met his gaze with eyes raw and shining, as if she finally believed he wouldn't leave her behind. The connection clicked into place. Hartman hauled Raiden upright. "You just made our job a whole lot easier." Raiden glared at Jake. "This isn't over. You have no idea who you're up against." Jake ignored him. His hand dropped to Riley's head. He felt her pulse, fast but steady, the rhythm of a survivor. "You all right, girl?" Riley pressed her head into his palm, her breath warm against his wrist. Jake whispered, "I've got you." And she believed him. The desert wind sharpened as Hartman led Raiden toward the patrol SUV, sand skimming low across the cracked concrete like a warning. Jake kept Riley close, one hand resting on her shoulders. She trembled not from fear, but from the aftershock of adrenaline. Scout peeked from the truck window, wide-eyed and confused, his tiny whimper cutting through the hot stillness. Then Raiden smiled. It wasn't the smile of a man caught or defeated. It was quiet, knowing, almost amused. That was the only warning they got. A roar erupted from behind the old machinery shed. An engine. Big. Heavy. Close. Jake spun. A beat-up construction truck exploded from behind the stacked girders, barreling forward in a cloud of white dust. Hartman shouted and dove aside as the truck fishtailed violently, its tires clawing at the dirt. Raiden had timed everything. His hands were cuffed, but another man sat behind the wheel. A man they hadn't seen. A man Raiden had clearly been waiting for. The truck swerved directly toward Jake. Riley barked once, a sharp, desperate cry. Jake turned just in time. Scout's weak, urgent yelp carried from the SUV window, thin but piercing, like the plea of something fragile fighting for breath. Jake dropped instinctively, grabbing Riley and rolling them both behind a concrete barrier as the truck thundered past, missing them by inches. Hartman opened fire, but the truck jerked sideways, smashing into a stack of steel drums. The driver bailed out, disappearing behind a mound of scrap. The engine coughed, died, then roared back to life as Raiden, still cuffed, climbed into the passenger seat. Jake's blood chilled. Raiden wasn't running. He was circling back. Jake pulled Riley close. "Stay behind me." She refused, nudging forward, positioning herself half in front of him. Her loyalty was fierce, unyielding, almost reckless. The truck slammed into gear and shot forward again. Jake braced for impact, but Riley moved first. She darted toward the truck, angling herself to drive it off course by sheer intimidation. She wasn't trying to attack. She was trying to warn Jake, protect him, distract Raiden. "Riley, no!" The truck swerved toward her. She leapt aside, but not fast enough. The bumper clipped her hind leg, sending her tumbling across the dirt. Jake's heart dropped. He sprinted to her, sliding to his knees. Riley whimpered but forced herself upright, leaning against him, refusing to stay down. Her eyes burned with something that broke him. She wasn't giving up. Ever. Hartman yelled something, but Jake barely heard it. Everything narrowed to the sound of spinning tires and Raiden's triumphant shout. Jake rose slowly, his body shifting into an old familiar rhythm. Breath steady, shoulders loose, vision sharpening into pinpoint focus. Marine mode, automatic, cold, efficient. Raiden swung open the passenger door as the truck slowed on its turn, cuffed hands gripping the frame. "You don't get it, Marine," he shouted. "I'm not working alone, I'm protected. You think this ends with me?" Jake didn't answer. He ran straight towards the truck. The driver gunned the engine. Jake calculated the distance in a heartbeat. 2 strides, 1 leap. His boot hit the bumper, then the hood, then the edge of the windshield. The truck lurched violently as the driver swerved, but Jake held on, slamming his fist into the glass until it cracked like ice. The driver panicked, jerking hard left. Jake used the momentum, swung around the side, and kicked the door open. The driver grabbed a steel bar and swung wildly. Jake ducked, slammed his elbow into the man's jaw, and dragged him out of the moving truck. They hit the ground, hard. The driver stayed down. Raiden screamed in fury. He jumped from the slowing truck and ran at Jake with the broken steel crowbar. Jake spun to face him. Raiden swung hard, the metal whistling through the air. Jake dodged, feeling the wind of the strike graze his cheek. He countered with a punch to Raiden's ribs, the impact jarring up his arm. Raiden staggered but didn't fall. He lunged again. Riley, limping but determined, charged back into the fray, planting herself between Jake and the crowbar. Raiden's eyes widened in panic. He swung blindly. Jake dove, pulling Riley away. But the steel still caught her shoulder. She yelped but stood firm, snarling, refusing to retreat. Something inside Jake snapped. Not rage, not fear, resolve. He moved like a man who'd spent years fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. He struck Raiden's wrist, forcing the crowbar free. Raiden swung a desperate punch. Jake blocked, stepped inside, and took him down with a controlled, brutal takedown that sent Raiden crashing onto his back. Jake pinned him with a forearm across the chest. "You're done." Raiden struggled, breath ragged, eyes burning with hatred. "You think you saved anything today? The operation goes on. People above me? They don't lose." Jake slammed Raiden's shoulder into the dirt. Hard enough to break the last of his resistance, but controlled. A Marine strike. Precise. "You're wrong," Jake said quietly. "Because you forgot something." He looked down at Riley, standing injured but unbroken, her gaze fierce and loyal. "You forgot what happens when someone fights for something they love." Hartman cuffed the unconscious driver and rushed to help secure Raiden. Backup sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Jake knelt by Riley again, hands gentle as he checked her injury. She licked his wrist once, her breath trembling. "You saved me," Jake whispered. Her tail brushed the dirt once, weak but proud. Scout's tiny bark echoed behind them from the truck window. Jake looked up, exhaling a shaky breath. The desert was quiet again, but the truth was no longer buried under sand and rust. Raiden wasn't a rogue. He was a small part of something larger, something organized. And now they knew. Jake pulled Riley close, resting his forehead against hers. "We're not done," he said. "Not even close." The courthouse in Red Mesa was small, held together by decades of sun-faded paint and the stubbornness of a town that refused to disappear. But on the morning Raiden Crew was marched through its doors in chains, it felt like the center of a storm that had finally found its eye. Hartman walked beside the deputies escorting Raiden, his jaw tight but steady. Reporters gathered along the steps, microphones raised, voices urgent. The news of the attack, the evidence found at the construction site, and the witness statements from Marla and Jake had spread faster than wildfire. People wanted answers. They wanted accountability. Raiden offered none. He kept his eyes forward, lips curled in a faint, defiant smile. But for the first time, he wasn't the one in control. Jake stood at a distance with Riley pressed against his leg, her bandaged shoulder rising and falling in slow breaths. She watched Raiden with calm, resolute eyes, no longer trembling, no longer afraid. She had survived him. Now he would face what he had done. The trial processed quickly, but the fallout did not. Hartman moved with a purpose Jake had never seen in him before. Within days, he secured warrants, pulled records, and began tracing the coded logs from the cabin. Every strange delivery, every unexplained transport, every anonymous payment. And slowly, a bigger picture emerged. It wasn't just Raiden. It was a full network. Former handlers, rogue transporters, a handful of corrupt contractors from nearby counties. They moved animals like stolen cargo, slipping them across rural roads where no one asked questions. And now, because Raiden had slipped, the entire network was being dragged under the sun. One by one, Hartman's team made arrests. Kennels were raided, dogs were recovered, some injured, some starving, some too terrified to stand, but they were alive. They were finally safe. Jake helped whenever he could, though he still limped from bruises he hadn't bothered to treat. Riley never left his side, and Scout, tiny and fragile, had become the beating heart of the recovery efforts. But Scout had his own battle first. Marla lifted the puppy gently from the exam table, her gloves stained with dried antiseptic. The small bandage on his hind leg looked impossibly fragile. "He's stable," she said softly. "But he needs surgery to repair the ligaments. Without it, he'll never run normally again." Jake felt the breath leave him. He looked down at Scout, whose small, bright eyes searched his face for reassurance. Riley leaned close, licking Scout's muzzle with the tenderness only a mother dog could give. Her touch made the pup wriggle and nuzzle into her fur. Jake swallowed hard. "Do it, whatever it takes." "You sure?" Marla asked. "It won't be cheap, and I know you—" "I'll find a way," Jake said. "He gets the best we can give him." He didn't explain why. He didn't need to. Scout went into surgery that evening. Jake sat outside the operating room with Riley curled into his lap, her head pressed to his chest. The waiting room lights buzzed softly. He stared at the floor, emotions tangled tight in his throat. Minutes passed. Then hours. Finally Marla appeared, her expression exhausted but bright. "He made it through," she said. "He's a fighter." Jake exhaled for what felt like the first time all day. Riley lifted her head and whined softly, as if she understood every word. Over the next weeks, Scout remained at the clinic for daily treatment. Jake visited every morning. Riley never missed a visit. The routine changed Jake in ways he didn't expect. He began repairing fences around Marla's rescue lot, fixing broken kennels, cleaning water troughs, laying gravel along the walkway. He worked quietly, methodically, as if each nail and wrench turn helped stitch something back together inside him. Marla was the one who finally spoke up. "You don't have to do all this for me," she said, while handing him another plank to mount along the fence. "I'm not doing it for you," Jake replied. He glanced at Riley lying in the shade, watching him the way she always did now, steady, loyal, certain he would not disappear. Marla nodded. "You're doing it for them." Jake didn't answer, but the truth sat openly in the space between them. It was during one of those afternoons, while Jake sat with Riley in the quiet of the backyard, that he finally broke his silence. He told her what he had never said out loud. "I wasn't supposed to come home," he said softly, running his hand down her back. "Lost 2 guys in my unit. I made the wrong call. We walked into a trap." Riley lay her head on his knee, eyes deep and steady. "I don't know why I walked out and they didn't," he whispered. "I've been carrying it ever since. Mistakes, regrets, nights I couldn't sleep without seeing it happen again." Riley nudged his hand with her nose, firm and gentle, grounding him. Jake swallowed, breath unsteady. "But when I saw you chasing Scout, when I saw how hard you fought for him, something shifted. You weren't thinking about fear or blame. You were just trying to save someone you loved." He hesitated, voice cracking. "It reminded me what courage really looks like." Riley licked his hand once. Slow, intentional. It wasn't comfort, it wasn't pity. It was recognition, the kind that existed between survivors. In the days that followed, Jake noticed something new. Riley didn't just follow him, she mirrored him. When he stopped to rest, she rested. When he grew tense at sudden noises, she stepped closer to steady him. When he worked, she watched over him as though guarding his spirit as fiercely as she had guarded Scout's body. Hartman joined them one evening, leaning against the railing as the sun dipped behind the canyon. "You know," he said, "the more we dig into Raiden's network, the clearer it gets. Someone way above him pulled the strings. This whole thing is just the first layer." Jake nodded. He had felt that from the beginning. "Meaning this isn't over," Hartman added. Jake looked down at Riley. She stood tall, her healing shoulder no longer dragging, her gaze calm but alert. "No," Jake said quietly. "It's not." But for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone facing what came next. Because Riley didn't walk behind him anymore, she walked beside him. 1 year later, the desert wind no longer carried the metallic scent of neglect. The old construction yard, once a graveyard of rusted beams and broken concrete, had been reborn. Its new name hung proudly on the wooden archway at the entrance, carved by hand and painted a warm chestnut brown. Brighter Trails. Shelter. Jake stood beneath the sign as the sun dipped behind the sandstone ridges, its glow stretching long shadows across the gravel yard. He exhaled, steady and grounded, something he hadn't felt in years. Children played near the fenced training circle. A retired couple chatted with Hartman near the intake office. And somewhere behind the kennels, a chorus of happy barks rose like a hymn. Riley trotted to Jake's side, nudging his hand with her nose. Her shoulder had healed cleanly, the scar hidden beneath thick, healthy fur. She carried herself with purpose now, moving with the confidence of a dog who had survived the worst the world could throw at her, and still found her place in it. Jake glanced down. "You keeping an eye on everyone again?" Riley's tail swayed once. He knew that meant yes. Scout bounded across the yard towards them, his gangly legs kicking up small clouds of dust. He had grown, though still small for his age, his back leg never fully straightened after surgery. The slight hitch in his stride didn't slow him. If anything, it gave him a determined charm that made every volunteer and visiting child fall instantly in love. He skidded to a stop at Riley's front paws, panting loudly. Riley leaned down to lick the top of his head, and Scout responded by nudging her chest proudly, as if announcing he had completed some grand mission. Jake chuckled. 2 patrols this morning? Or 3? Scout barked, the sound high and confident. A year ago he couldn't even stand without wobbling. Now he raced across the yard with the stubborn boldness of a survivor who refused to be defined by the pain left behind. Hartman approached from the intake building, legal folders tucked under his arm. He had traded his sheriff's patrol uniform for clean jeans and a collared shirt. "You've got 3 new adoption interviews lined up this afternoon," he said. "People are starting to come from all over the county." Jake rubbed the back of his neck. "Good problem to have." "It's the right kind," Hartman replied, scanning the yard. "This place is working. They trust you, and they trust her." Riley lifted her head at the sound of her name, tail rising with soft pride. "She's the reason any of this exists," Jake said quietly. Hartman nodded. "People need hope. That dog gives it better than any speech." A group of teenagers approached the main gate, laughing as they carried boxes of donated blankets and toys. One of the girls pointed excitedly when she saw Riley, whispering to her friends before mustering the courage to come closer. "Is that her?" she asked Jake. "The dog from the story?" Jake nodded, stepping aside so Riley could greet them. The teens crouched, letting her sniff their hands. She accepted each one calmly, then pressed her head into the girl's chest, as if she understood exactly why they had come. "She's even sweeter in person," the girl whispered, stroking Riley's cheek. "My mum said a dog like her changed the whole town." Jake didn't correct her. Some things didn't need explaining. As the teens carried their donations inside, Jake walked toward the far edge of the yard. Riley stayed close, Scout bouncing alongside like a shadow with too much energy. Behind the kennels stood a wooden bench Jake had built himself, its surface still rough in places. He sat, letting Riley rest her head on his lap. From here, he could see the whole shelter. The volunteers laughing as they repaired the agility course, the kids guiding nervous rescue dogs through trust exercises, the rows of clean kennels glowing in the afternoon light. Everything felt different now. 1 year ago, the yard had echoed with fear and secrets. Now it pulsed with something quieter, softer, but stronger. Healing. Jake brushed his thumb along Riley's ear. "Hard to believe we made it here." Riley looked up, meeting his gaze. Her eyes held that calm, steady depth that had never left her, not even when she was bleeding and terrified in the back of that clinic room a year ago. Jake continued, voice low. "I used to wake up every night thinking about the past, about choices I couldn't undo." Riley licked the base of his wrist once. She didn't break eye contact. "But then you showed up, chasing Scout like the world was ending, fighting harder than any Marine I ever knew. You made me remember what courage looks like." He swallowed. The desert breeze pushed gently through the shelter yard, stirring the hanging wind chimes Marla had placed above the healing garden. "You made me remember what living looks like." Scout climbed onto the bench beside him, curling against his leg. Jake rested a hand on the pup's chest, feeling the warm, steady heartbeat there. Scout closed his eyes, content. From the corner of the yard, Marla's voice carried through the fading light. "Jake, we've got a family from Flagstaff hoping to meet Rusty, and the sheriff from Cochise just called, said he wants to tour the place next week." Jake nodded, rising. "On my way." Riley straightened instantly, ready to follow. Scout hopped down clumsily but kept pace, limping only slightly on the first few steps before finding his rhythm again. Jake watched them both for a moment, something deep inside him settling into place. These weren't just dogs. They were survivors, guardians, pieces of his own fractured life that had stitched themselves into something whole. As he walked back toward the shelter buildings, he noticed the neighbors on the hill waving from their porch. A few ranchers approached with bags of feed. Even a group of veteran volunteers had arrived early for their shift. 1 year ago, they were strangers. Now they believed in this place, believed in what Riley had started. Jake pushed open the gate and felt Riley brush against his side, Scout circling his boots. He smiled despite himself. The storm had come and gone. What remained was quieter, stronger, and it was only the beginning. The yellow school bus rumbled up the dusty road leading to Brighter Trail's shelter, kicking up a soft cloud behind it. Jake stood near the welcome gate with Riley at his side and Scout prancing in front, excited by the unfamiliar engine noise. The bus hissed to a stop. Doors swung open, and 24th graders poured out like a wave of color and chatter, their voices bouncing across the wide desert yard. Jake had been warned they were energetic. He hadn't expected a stampede. Riley positioned herself calmly at his heel, the steady presence that kept the chaos at bay. Scout, on the other hand, trotted up to the first group of kids with the confidence of a tiny mare greeting his citizens. The children squealed and dropped to their knees to pet him. For a moment, Jake just watched with a hint of awe. A year ago, Scout had been unable to even stand on his own. Now he was leading a crowd. A teacher approached Jake. "Mr. Mercer, thank you for having us. The kids have been looking forward to this all month." Jake nodded. "Glad to have them." He gestured toward Riley. "This girl's the reason any of this exists." The kids quieted just enough to hear him. Riley walked forward, slow and composed, a tail lifted with the confidence of a seasoned guardian. She touched her nose to the hand of a small, shy boy, and his whole face softened. Jake smiled. "All right, everyone, follow me. I want to tell you a story." He led them to the shaded outdoor classroom, a simple wooden deck lined with benches. Scout hopped on to the first one, tail thumping loudly. Riley sat beside Jake, her eyes sweeping the group like she was taking head count. Jake took a breath and began. "This place wasn't always a shelter. A year ago it was nothing more than abandoned concrete and dust. The only souls out here were a mother dog and her puppy." Several kids leaned forward. Jake continued, steady and clear. "Someone was dragging her pup under a truck, and she chased him for miles, never giving up. That's how I met Riley. That's how I met Scout." He paused, a faint smile touching the corner of his mouth as he glanced at Riley. She watched him silently. She didn't know me. She didn't trust me. But she needed help. And when I picked up her injured pup, she laid her head on my leg, asking without words. That moment changed everything. He told them about the investigation, the rescue efforts, the nights spent helping Scout recover. He didn't go into the darker parts. The kids didn't need those details. What they needed was understanding. "What Riley taught me," he said, "is that loyalty isn't something you earn once. It's something you show every day. And healing doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it starts with one choice to protect, someone who can't protect themselves." The group fell quiet. Even the restless kids sat still. Jake felt the weight of the moment settle gently between all of them. One student stood out more than the others. A girl in a light pink hoodie lingered at the edge of the benches, her left arm wrapped in a soft brace. She watched Scout the way someone watched a memory they weren't ready to share. Her name was Emma, her teacher had mentioned quietly. She'd been in a car accident 6 months earlier and barely spoke since. Scout seemed to notice her instantly. He hopped down, limping slightly, and walked straight to her. Emma stiffened, her fingers curled. Jake watched carefully, ready to intervene. But Scout stopped 2 feet away and sat. Not begging, not jumping, just waiting. Emma's eyes softened. She lifted her hand, stopped halfway, trembled. Scout moved closer and gently pressed his forehead to her fingertips. A tiny sound escaped her. Not a word, more like a breath she'd been holding for months. Emma knelt and wrapped both arms around Scout. For the first time since she'd arrived, her shoulders relaxed. Jake saw her whisper something into his fur. Riley watched quietly, tail swaying once, almost imperceptible. The teacher's eyes went glassy. She hasn't approached an animal since the accident. Jake swallowed hard. She just needed someone who understood hurt. After playtime and a tour of the kennels, the kids gathered around Riley and Scout one last time before boarding the bus. Emma lingered again, brushing Scout's ears. "Can we come back?" she finally asked, her voice fragile but real. Jake nodded. "Anytime." As the bus drove away, dust trailing behind like a fading ribbon, Jake felt a warmth settle in his chest. The yard seemed brighter, the air lighter, but the day wasn't over. A black SUV turned onto the road and slowed near the gate. Jake frowned in curiosity. A woman stepped out, carrying a camera bag. Her hair was swept into a loose bun, her press badge clipped to her belt. "Maya Torres," she introduced herself. "Channel 6. I've been wanting to meet the Marine who started this place." Jake raised an eyebrow. "I didn't start it. Riley did." "Well," Maya said with a grin, "my viewers need to hear that too." She spent hours filming the shelter, interviewing volunteers, watching Riley interact with visitors. The sun dipped low, painting the desert in amber light as Maya followed Jake to the outer fence line. "This isn't just a rescue story," she said, adjusting her lens. "It's a story about second chances, for the dogs, for the town, and for you." He didn't argue. She filmed Riley pacing the ridge, Scout bounding behind her, the two silhouettes framed by the falling sun. "And this?" Maya asked. "This is the mother and pup everyone's been talking about?" Jake looked at them, at their bond, at how far they had come. "Yes," he said softly. "They're the start of everything." 2 weeks later, the segment aired. By morning, Brighter Trails had donations from 3 states. Volunteers called non-stop. A local foundation offered funding for a new medical wing. Children who watched the story wrote letters thanking Riley for being brave. And for the first time, Jake understood the full meaning of legacy. It wasn't fame. It wasn't credit. It was moments like Emma gently touching Scout's healed paw. It was hope passed from one life to another. It was Riley standing strong again, carrying the past but no longer defined by it. It was a story that no longer belonged to him alone. It belonged to everyone who believed in healing, everyone who believed in loyalty, everyone who believed in starting again. The sun climbed steadily over the Arizona horizon, casting long bands of gold across the brand new sign, Brighter Trails Sanctuary. Beneath it, the yard buzzed with life. Volunteers in fresh uniforms guided visitors along fenced walkways. Families gathered near the adoption paddock. A dozen news cameras clustered under the canopy tent, lenses pointed toward the main platform. Jake stood behind the curtain flap for a moment, steadying his breath. He had faced combat patrols in foreign deserts, but somehow this felt heavier. Not dangerous, just meaningful. Riley brushed her side gently against his leg, sensing the shift in his heartbeat. Scout wagged, leaning into his boot, eager for whatever came next. "You ready?" Marla asked quietly from behind him. Jake nodded. "I think they're more ready than I am." Riley lifted her head proudly, as though confirming it. Scout barked once, sharp and confident. When Jake stepped out onto the platform, the crowd erupted into warm applause. Not loud or showy, honest, the kind that wraps around you. He felt his chest loosen. Deputy Hartman gave a small wave from the front row, his badge glinting in the morning light. Maya stood beside him, camera already rolling. Several kids from the school trip held handmade signs that said things like, "Thank you, Riley," and "Scout the Brave." Jake leaned down and let Scout hop onto the wooden crate beside him so the cameras could see him. Riley stood at his flank, stoic and radiant. A reporter raised her hand. "Jake, before we officially open the sanctuary, I have to ask the question everyone wants answered." He gestured for her to continue. "Why did you keep them with you through everything?" Jake looked at Riley first. Her amber eyes watched him with a calm that felt like home. Then he placed his palm on Scout's head. The pup pressed into it with unmistakable trust. He spoke softly but clearly. "They didn't just survive the desert. They helped me survive my own." A ripple passed through the crowd, a kind of stillness that felt sacred. Even the wind seemed to pause. Jake continued, eyes steady on the rows of people and the rows of cameras behind them. "They showed me that broken doesn't mean finished. That loyalty can pull you out of places you didn't think you'd ever escape. And that healing doesn't come from forgetting what happened. It comes from choosing what happens next." Riley shifted closer, touching her muzzle lightly to his hand. Scout pawed at his boot as if urging him on. Jake looked straight into the main camera lens. "What's your story with a loyal pet?" Silence. A deep, resonant silence. Then the wind arrived again. Warm, dusty, familiar. It brushed across the sanctuary grounds like a blessing. Riley turned toward the open dunes beyond the fence. Her ears perked, her body alert yet peaceful. Scout followed her gaze, eyes bright, as if both mother and son sensed something calling from the horizon. Not danger, not fear, possibility. A journey not yet written. Maya captured the moment perfectly. The silhouettes of the two shepherds against the stretching desert. Jake standing behind them, hand on Scout's back, the rising sun behind all three. The ceremony continued. Ribbon cut. Applause. A dozen dogs released into new play yards. Children laughing. Volunteers hugging. Hartman announcing the funding expansion for the new veterinary wing. It was everything Jake had once believed he would never have. But even in the joy, a subtle plot twist arrived. A woman approached Jake near the end of the event. Older, with sun-creased cheeks and a quiet strength in her posture. "You're Mercer, right?" she asked. "Yes, Mom." She glanced at Riley and Scout. "Those dogs. They're the reason I'm here. My nephew lost his dog to that trafficking ring last year. He hasn't talked much since. But he saw the news segment. He made me promise to bring him to meet Riley someday." Jake swallowed. "Tell him he's welcome any time." She smiled, touched his arm, and walked off. Riley watched her leave, as if understanding that healing often arrived in strangers' footsteps. The sanctuary slowly emptied, but the feeling lingered, something larger than any one rescue, something growing. Jake kneeled beside Riley. "You did this," he said quietly. Riley leaned into him. Scout jumped between them, licking Jake's chin until he laughed for the first time in months. The wind picked up again, lifting the edge of the giant banner overhead. Brighter Trails Sanctuary. Hope begins where fear ends. Jake stood, looking out over the grounds, then toward the dunes where Riley still stared. The desert stretched far beyond the fences, endless and alive, the kind of place where anything could begin. And their story wasn't done, not by a long shot. To everyone watching, everyone listening, everyone believing in dogs like Riley and Scout, Jake finally added one last message, one he hoped would carry farther than the Arizona wind. If this story moves you, share it. Support your local rescues. And if you want more stories like theirs, stay with us, follow along, Help us give every German shepherd, every stray, every broken soul a fighting chance." Riley lifted her head. Scout barked proudly. The desert answered with a soft, rising breeze. Their journey continued, just beyond the next ridge.